Okay, so today we're going to go through the lab portion of the respiratory system. Okay, so the respiratory system in general is the way that we obtain oxygen for our cells to use in ATP production. Okay, so all of our cells need a constant or steady supply of oxygen, and we obtain that oxygen from the air around us. Okay, we bring the air around us into our respiratory tract and down into our lungs, okay, where the oxygen can diffuse from the air in our lungs, okay, across the surfaces of the alveoli into the lung capillaries. Okay, and at that point the oxygen enters the bloodstream. Okay, so we also use the respiratory system for a couple other functions. For example, smelling. Okay, when we bring air into our nasal cavity, we have different compounds come in contact with the scent or the olfactory receptors that are in the nasal cavity, and that's how we smell. Okay, we also utilize the respiratory system to speak. Okay, when I'm speaking to you right now, the reason I'm able to produce sound is because I'm forcing air through my vocal folds or vocal cords, which are inside the larynx. Okay? As the air passes through those vocal folds, it causes them to vibrate. Okay? And the vibration produces sound waves. And we can alter the tension on those vocal folds in order to alter the pitch of the sound we produce. Okay? So we utilize the respiratory system for multiple different functions. Okay? The most important of those is obtaining oxygen. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through the models and we're going to follow the same path that air follows, okay? So we're going to start right here where air first enters into the nasal cavity. So these holes that are located right here are called the external nares. Okay, those are literally just your nostrils right here and here. The external nares. Then when we look right here, okay, this first little swollen area, this first little area in the entrance to the nasal cavity, is called the nasal vestibule. Okay, that's right here where you flare your nostrils, okay? The nasal vestibule. As we progress backwards until right here, okay, this is showing us the nasal cavity, okay, the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is divided into two halves by the nasal septum, which we can't see here on the model. Okay, so when we look at this right here, we're only looking at one half of the nasal cavity. Okay, but we see that we have these shelves or these bony protrusions that stick out from the outer or lateral wall of the nasal cavity. Okay, these are called the nasal concha or conchae. Okay. They're named that because they're named after the conch shell, because they're literally curving or curling bones, okay? Just like a conch shell is curved or curled. These bones, the superior, middle, and inferior nasal concha, divide the nasal cavity up into these thin passageways that air flows through. These passageways are called meatuses. So we have the superior, middle, and inferior nasal meatus. Okay? The point of these is that as air flows through them, these create turbulence. They force the air to kind of get bounced around through the nasal cavity. They also increase the surface area for the nasal epithelium. Okay, these two things combined means that as we inhale the air, it gets bounced around, okay? And all of the junk that's in the air, the dirt, the dust, pollen, debris, pathogens, all get trapped in the mucus that's in the nasal cavity, okay? So they don't make it their way down to the lungs. Also, because we have such warmth and moisture in that nasal cavity, the air gets warmed up and it gets humidified, okay, which is the way the lungs like it. Finally, because the air bounces around, we have a greater chance of the scent molecules coming in contact with our olfactory receptors so that we can actually smell the things that are in the air. Okay? So, at the back of the nasal cavity, okay, which is right here, we have the internal nares. Okay, so your external nares and your internal nares. Okay? So this is the passageway from the nasal cavity back here into the pharynx or throat. Okay, so speaking of, this here is the pharynx or throat, and it actually has 3 different sections. Okay, the first section goes from here at the internal nares to right here, okay, which is the end of the soft palate, and that's the nasopharynx. Okay, the nasopharynx, right behind the nasal cavity. From here, okay, the end of the soft palate, down to this level, okay, which is right here at the level of the hyoid bone, is the oropharynx, okay, behind the oral cavity or mouth, oropharynx. Finally, the last part, which is from the level of the hyoid bone here, down until we enter the esophagus, is the laryngopharynx, okay, the laryngopharynx behind the larynx, or voice box, okay? So those are our 3 parts of the pharynx or throat, okay? As we look at those 3 parts, we see that we have some other structures that we need to know. Up here in the nasopharynx, in the very back of it, right here, we see this tonsil. Okay, this is called the pharyngeal tonsil, PH, pharyngeal tonsil, or also called the adenoid. Okay, we just have 1 pharyngeal tonsil. Also, if you see right here, there's just a little hole there. Okay, and that shows you the entrance to the auditory tubes, also known as the eustachian, EU, eustachian tubes. Okay, and those are the tubes that go to the inner ear and allow us to equalize pressure on either side of the eardrum so that the eardrum doesn't blow. Okay, so we have the adenoid or pharyngeal tonsil, and we have the eustachian tubes. Okay. Also, as we look down right here, okay, we see that at the bottom of the nasal cavity, we have this bony area here, which is called the hard palate. Okay, that forms the bottom of the nasal cavity and the roof or top of the mouth. Behind the hard palate, we have this soft palate. Okay, and that's not bony, that's muscular. Right behind the soft palate, we have this area here, which is called the uvula. Okay, and that's when you open your mouth and say, ah, the little area that you see hanging down. Okay, that's what that is, the uvula. Okay, so if you go from the hard palate, soft palate, uvula, and you drop straight down from there, okay, you have another set of tonsils, which are called the palatine tonsils. Okay, so from the palate down, palatine tonsils. And you have 2 of those, okay, 1 on either side. And then, see, this is the oral cavity or mouth. Okay, you'll see the tongue right here. And if you just go right down from the tongue, right here we see another set of tonsils. Okay, and these are called the lingual tonsils. You can remember that because they're associated with the tongue. Okay, we use our tongue to speak, linguistics. Okay, lingual, linguistics. Also, when we put a medication under the tongue, that's called sublingual, okay, beneath the tongue. So that makes sense that this tonsil here is a lingual tonsil, okay? So, we had our nasal cavity, we're behind that, the nasopharynx. Beneath the nasopharynx, we said we have the oropharynx, okay? And then beneath the oropharynx, we have the laryngopharynx, okay? So, air comes through the nasal cavity, okay, down the first part of the throat, or pharynx, and then it doesn't go this way, right? It doesn't enter the esophagus. That's where food and water goes. Air comes this way, okay? It comes this way. And this structure right here that air goes through is called the larynx. That's the voice box, okay? Your larynx, your voice box, where your voice is produced. So when we look at this voice box, okay, we see that we actually have multiple different cartilages. Okay, there's multiple different cartilages that all come together and are held together to surround and protect the vocal cords as well as the glottis, which is the slit-like opening into the trachea or windpipe. Okay, so we're going to take a look at each of those cartilages that make up the larynx. Okay, first I'm going to show you on this model here because it makes the cartilages a lot more clear. And then I'll go back and show you what they look like on that other model. Okay? So this is a larynx model, very, very large larynx model. This right here is showing you the hyoid bone, okay? And then this down here is showing you all of the cartilages that are associated with the larynx, okay? So this very large top cartilage here is the thyroid cartilage, okay? The thyroid cartilage. You see that it's very large in the front, but if I turn this around back, it does not go around the back, okay? So the thyroid cartilage is not in the back of the larynx, okay? The thyroid cartilage, this prominence or this point right here, is what appears as the Adam's apple on the throat, okay? So this is the thyroid cartilage. Right beneath the thyroid cartilage, we have the cricoid cartilage. Cricoid, C-R-I-C-O-I-D, cricoid. The cricoid cartilage appears small in the front, but if we turn it around to the back, you see that it's large in the back, okay? It's a lot bigger in the back. And the size difference in the front and the back is going to be important when we identify these cartilages on the other models that are sectioned, okay? So thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, and then down here, which this is the trachea, here the windpipe, we see that we have all of these little repeating cartilages over and over and over. Okay, and those are C-shaped cartilages. They're not rings, they're C-shaped. Okay, because if I turn this around, you see that they don't exist in the back. Okay, the back of the trachea does not have cartilage there. Okay? So each of these C-shaped cartilages are tracheal cartilages. Okay, they're part of the trachea, tracheal cartilages. In between each of these pieces of cartilage, we see that they're held together with ligaments. Okay? So when we look in between the tracheal cartilages, we see these ligaments are called annular ligaments. Annular. Okay? They repeat over and over and over. Just like an annual event happens over and over and over. Okay? Then if we look right up here, okay, between the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage, we see that we have a ligament called the cricothyroid ligament. Okay, it's named from the bottom structure to the top. Okay, the cricothyroid ligament. We also have another ligament that's right here that's not actually shown on this model. I'll show it to you on another model though. Okay, and this ligament's also named for the bottom structure, then the top. Okay, so that's the thyrohyoid ligament. Okay, thyrohyoid ligament goes right here. So if we turn the structure around, we see that we have a few more cartilages to identify. Okay, this top little cartilage here, this flap that you see that moves up and down, okay, and it's shaped like a shoehorn or an upside down spoon. This cartilage is called the epiglottis. Okay, epiglottis, because it's above the glottis, okay, which is the slit-like opening into the trachea. This epiglottis is very important because its function is to cover up or form a lid on top of the glottis, on top of the trachea, so that food and water don't go down through the larynx and into the trachea when we swallow. We want food to get pushed back into the esophagus. We don't want it to go into our respiratory tract. So the way we prevent that from happening is with this epiglottis. Okay, let me show you how that actually works real quick. If you look at this model here, okay, this flap is showing you the epiglottis. Okay? And this is showing you the larynx or voice box. When we swallow, the whole larynx moves up. And you can see that above it is a solid surface here. So if this whole larynx were to be pushed up, the epiglottis gets forced down. Okay, so when it gets forced down, it literally does this. Okay, it forms a lid or a top over this voice box to cover up the glottis or the entrance to the trachea. Okay, so when that folds down, the food and water that we're swallowing is forced back this way into the esophagus. Okay, that's why when you swallow, you can literally see the throat moving. You can watch someone's neck and see the movement when they swallow. Okay, that's actually the larynx or voice box that you're seeing moving up to force the epiglottis down, okay? So this is our epiglottis, okay? This little flap that moves. When we look right here, we also see a couple other cartilages, okay? And these are actually two pairs of cartilages that we see here. There are these two large ones on the bottom, and then the tips here are actually two separate cartilages. These little triangles on the top are separate, okay? So these two itty-bitty triangles on the top are the corniculate cartilages. And in Latin, corniculate actually means horns. Okay, so you can see that these look like horns, the corniculate cartilages. Okay, and those are responsible for helping the vestibular folds, which we'll look at in a second, close. These larger cartilages on the bottom here are the vestibular. Okay, vestibular folds I just said. These larger cartilages on the bottom are the arytenoid cartilages. Okay, arytenoid, A-R-Y, arytenoid cartilages. Okay, the arytenoid cartilages are important because they attach to the vocal folds or vocal cords. And if I tilt this like this, you can actually see in here, okay, these are showing us the vocal folds or vocal cords. Remember I said that's where we produce sound, okay? So these arytenoid cartilages attach to the cords and we can turn them, okay, or rotate them. As we turn them, okay, they tighten or loosen the vocal folds. Okay, and as we tighten or loosen the vocal folds, that adjusts the pitch of the sound we produce. Just like in a guitar, okay, when you move or pluck a guitar string, it produces a sound wave. And if you want to change the pitch of that sound wave, what do? You tighten or loosen the guitar strings. So we do the same thing, okay? So again, epiglottis, okay, the little tips here are the corniculate cartilages. Okay, these larger cartilages here on the bottom are the arytenoid cartilages. Okay? Finally, the last thing is this little area in the back of the trachea. Remember I said that all of these tracheal cartilages are C-shaped. They don't go around the back of the trachea. Okay, so when we look at the back of the trachea, we see that there's just a membrane, a flexible membrane here. Okay, and that's called the tracheal membrane. The reason that we don't have cartilages going completely around the trachea are that we need flexibility here in the back of the trachea. Okay, if you look at what's directly behind the trachea, you see that it's the esophagus. And the esophagus is actually a closed or more constricted tube. Okay, so when we swallow a big bolus or a big bite of food down the esophagus has to stretch out to make room for that food. Okay, and it can't open up or stretch backwards because that's where the vertebrae are. So it has to stretch out forwards. Okay, it kind of, that bolus of food pushes forwards into the trachea area. Okay, so when we swallow, the esophagus actually stretches out and pushes into this area at the back of the trachea, and it takes away some of the space from the trachea. If we had cartilage rings that went all the way around, it wouldn't be able to do that. The cartilage is firm and strong. Okay, so it's important that we just have this flexible membrane in the back. Okay? So real quick, let's look at this here, and I'll show you those cartilages we just went over on this model so that you can identify them if we're looking at a section. Okay? This here is showing you the hyoid bone. Okay? This here, okay, is showing you the thyroid cartilage. Okay, big in the front, it does not exist in the back. This is showing you the cricoid cartilage. Small in front, large in back. Okay, then we see our thyroid cartilages, our tracheal cartilages beginning here. Tracheal cartilages, part of the trachea. And this little flap up here, remember, is our epiglottis. Okay, right here, this white area, you can also see the ligament, the thyrohyoid ligament. Okay, it goes from the thyroid to the hyoid. Okay, you can't really see the cricothyroid ligament though on here. So So on this model, okay, we can also see the larynx well, and then we can open it up and we can look at the folds, the vocal folds and vestibular folds. So just looking at it from the outside, up top we see the hyoid bone. Next we see the thyroid cartilage, big in the front, non-existent in the back. Next we see the cricoid cartilage. Remember, it's small in the front, large in the back. Then we see the trachea that starts to go down towards the lungs. Remember, these C-shaped cartilages are our tracheal cartilages, and the white ligaments in between them are the annular ligaments. Remember, we also have a ligament here, okay, between the cricoid and thyroid, okay, and that's the cricothyroid ligament. Remember, we also have a ligament up here, okay, between the thyroid and hyoid, and that's the thyrohyoid ligament, okay? So if I open this up, there we go. We can look at it this way, okay? And we can see this is the epiglottis sticking up, okay? Kind of a curved shoehorn-shaped cartilage, okay? And then we see in here, inside the larynx or voice box, we see these two folds, an upper pair of folds and a lower pair of folds. Okay, the superior or upper pair of folds here are the vestibular folds. Okay, the vestibular folds. They help to protect the underlying vocal folds, and then the glottis or opening to the trachea. So the vestibular folds are on top. Okay, the more apparent lower folds here are the vocal folds. Okay, the vocal folds. Remember, those are the folds that we vibrate in order to produce sound, to speak. So we go through the larynx or voice box, and then we carry air down through the respiratory tree or the bronchial tree to bring